This should be information that underlines what we need to do to move this country forward. Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leis, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, the live edition. And today, on July the 23rd, we're talking about all the marbles. We're talking about, is freedom of speech in this country, in Canada, in jeopardy today? Well, we're going to talk about the facts, the policy, the law, and we're going to zero in on six, I believe, epitomize bad public policy in terms of laws that will make freedom of speech in jeopardy. So what do you think? Is this 1984 in 2026? What is at stake in terms of power and your ability to speak confidently, to debate the issues in the grand tradition, our Anglo-Saxon tradition of seeking the truth and everything? So this is a very important program, I believe, a discussion in this moment in time, our history. And we have the A-team panel to discuss this, the facts. So please stay tuned. On that note, I want to thank you all for your engagement and comments. They come in by the thousands every month, and including this one from KL from really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you. And that was from our last week. Great information, gentlemen. And that is from Joan Rabb. And I believe that's in response to a program that was released this last Tuesday with Kim Moody, an accountant extraordinaire, about why Canadians are leaving, specifically the entrepreneurial class, and the need for tax reform. And further to that was great discussion and informative privilege wheel. I never heard of it till now. What a joke. And that's from 50 Flying V. So keep those comments coming. And as people come onto the program, be sure to like and share this with friends. Get people involved. I want to share some quick headlines. There's a lot going on during this week. Things ain't slowing down in the summer, including the government is quietly testing digital ID. Cabinet has quietly begun testing that digital ID apps is on an experimental basis. And I just want to note that's from Blacklock's Media. In the Winnipeg Sun, Manitoba and Winnipeg among the leaders in inflation. And that is for particular reasons. So stay tuned on that. The mandatory French rule is picking up steam here as Edmonton grain millers, Edmonton telecom providers, and bankers in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia must speak French under a draft federal regulations detailed Saturday by Heritage Minister Mark Miller. So it's interesting. I believe that's for employers over 100. There's also stats that came out, again, through Blacklock's reporter from the government itself, around the estimates of the number, the thousands of people that are sleeping in cars and alleys. Very sad tragedy when we look at those numbers. Does that make sense to you? In other news, the first department to boycott formerly known Twitter, or X, was the Women and Gender Equality Minister, has weighed in and is the first to delete all departmental X accounts. And the belief was that it has too many hurtful remarks by the public on this social media channel, and it has created significant mental strain for employees. In other news, house starts are falling according to CMHC. They're not going up, they're going down. That's not going to help. And we also have other news in terms of public opinion polls, and that is a clear majority supports pipelines to the BC coast. And that's according to a composite set of polls put together by 338 Canada. And a very interesting story to pay attention to, and this relates to artificial intelligence as OpenAI agent goes rogue in unprecedented cyber incident and hacks into a rival AI startup during security tests. What does this mean? And that's from a headline from the New York Post. So pay attention to that one. We also have other news related to, of course, the saga regarding tariffs. As of this morning, apparently the Trump administration understands, according to their trade representative that appeared just before a House committee today, Jameson Greer, testified that they understand from Canada that there won't be a retaliation following the tariff threat. That's according to this latest hour, so stay tuned on that one. We also heard that the Manitoba Premier yesterday said that they're willing to entertain a pipeline from Alberta to Ontario. So that's an interesting option as we try to get this country moving again. And a former public servant was just accused of copying thousands of government files, very sensitive ones that are classified to the People's Republic of China, according to a recent report out of the Epoch Times. And I also want to note that the continued debate about was it a good deal to open up the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is obviously an important bridge between Canada and the United States. And apparently those documents have just been released. And so people are trying to analyze, well, was it a really good deal or not? So stay tuned on that one. So let's turn to our program about freedom of speech and what's happening today in this country on July the 23rd. On this show, we've got a big agenda, not only about is free speech in jeopardy in 2026, why free speech is so important, why it really means everything, the marbles. What are the laws that concern you and why? And why does this matter to you, Canadians? So we're going to dive into that. We've got an incredible panel. I want to introduce Amy Hamm. She's a columnist with the National. She is also on the front lines of freedom of speech.
Oh, sorry.
And welcome, Amy. And
sorry. God, I've got a son home from summer camp.
that's marvelous. And we're really glad that you could join us in this conversation today, Amy. A warm welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. And of course, we've got the great Nigel Hannaford, and he is well known at the Western Standard, and he's also quite a columnist extraordinaire, and he's also a former speechwriter for a former prime minister. So welcome, Nigel.
Thank you for having me. These are my subjects.
And of course, our regular John Carpay, who's the president of the Justice Center, and John cares deeply. He's about the topic that we're diving into, and he's also an author and all-around good guy. So a warm welcome, John.
So glad to be with you.
So I want to start off with a really basic question. Amy, Nigel, and John, beginning with you, Amy, is free speech really in jeopardy in 2026 in this country, or are we just being dramatic, histrionic types?
Undeniably so. And, I could talk about the fact that I'm now in year 6.5 of a free speech battle represented by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. And that's, of course, in regard to making comments while, I was working as a professional nurse for 13 years. In my off-duty time, I made comments about sex and gender and women's rights in this country. And now it's, coming up on 7 years of litigation to defend myself against the punishment that's been doled out for daring to speak about this issue. So I think that you would have to be just lying to say that free speech isn't in jeopardy in Canada. And I know that I'm one of many persons who've been similarly affected, whether it's a professional who has a regulator that can come after them. And I hear from dozens of Canadians about how they are afraid to share their political views in the current climate. People just stay silent so that they don't get into issues, whether it's with their employer or even just in, losing friend circles. It's a huge issue in Canada.
It's a huge issue. So it is in jeopardy from your perspective, Amy, and bravo on your courageous story there as that unfolds. Nigel, what's your response? Is free speech in jeopardy in 2026?
Well, certainly. What's going on is this, that the federal government is trying to do what governments tend to try and do throughout history and in every country, and that's control the way people think. Now, it's the advantage to the government is obvious, but what we're observing is a government that is trying to take us away from our free speech traditions that were formulated in Great Britain and in the United States and spread around the world And oddly enough, was summed up supposedly by a Frenchman. Voltaire is said to have said, I don't think he actually did, but that doesn't matter, that I may not approve of what you say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it. That phrase defined politics in this country right up until about 10 years ago. Now, what is happening now is that this particular government, which has a rather different view of what you should be allowed to say, is slowly putting forts, a siege engine, if you like, around the idea that you should be able to say freely what you want. It's your opinion. And if you're not doing the obvious stupid things, then you're free to say it. They don't like that because sometimes people say things that are, from their point of view, distinctly off message. So as we get into the program, I hope you are going to give us a chance to talk about the different legislation by which they do it. And the other thing, before I came on the program, just looked up the number of times that this government, through its main spokesman, has talked about the need to confront disinformation and misinformation, which sounds like a good role for government to be doing, except that who defines what is dis and misinformation? Guess what? It's the government in its mind, and they have legislation to see that it happens that way. You'll be talking about it later, I'm sure.
You bet we will. Well said, Nigel. We're deviating from that long tradition of honoring free speech, so thank you. John, what's your response? Is freedom of speech in jeopardy in 2026 in Canada?
Yes, and it has been for decades, and it's only getting worse. We have human rights legislation. Justice Center released a report 2 or 3 months ago with numerous examples, case after case after case, of people getting prosecuted for, typically it's social conservative speech. Sometimes it's libertarian speech. Sometimes it's things that the four of us would just regard as common sense. And so people get prosecuted by human rights commissions. We saw in British Columbia, former elected school board trustee Barry Neufeld advocating for kids against transgender ideology and being ordered to pay $750,000 to some LGBTQ teachers in Chilliwack. We've had criminal laws on the books, which until now have not, they've probably had some chilling effect that is difficult to measure. But because of our culture, right? The law is extremely important and culture is even more important. So if you have a free speech culture where everybody understands from birth onwards that we all have the right to state our opinion and we don't have the right to silence other people and the government has no right to silence us, if that's really strong in your culture, then even a bad law is not going to have the same amount of impact. But so these criminal code provisions, they're very arbitrary. You cannot willfully promote hatred against a group identified by its race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual proclivities, gender expression, sexual orientation, religion, and a bunch of other grounds. However, you can legally promote hatred against Canadians who chose not to get injected with the COVID vaccine. You can be a Marxist and promote hatred against landowners and factory owners. You can promote hatred against wealthy people and say that anybody who is wealthy became that way because they were dishonest and they ripped people off. You can promote hatred against hundreds and hundreds of different groups of people, and that's perfectly legal. However, you cannot do it if it's pertaining to their race, religion, gender, sexual orientation. So we have these arbitrary hate speech laws. And just earlier this week, the Justice Center was contacted by somebody who had a police show up at their door to discuss a tweet they sent out in 2025. So we put out a tweet saying, if you've got the police knocking on your door, contact us. We want to nip this in the bud and not become like the United Kingdom, where you've had thousands of people have been arrested or visited by police or both about what they've written on social media. So we're in very bad shape. On the positive side, we still have enough free speech left to fight against it. And I think we can still turn the tide. But if we continue on the same trajectory, we'll be in a position within a few years where it becomes almost impossible to reverse the restrictions.
Wow, what a summation. So, John, just to clarify, there was a tweet on X and somebody showed up. What can just clarify what happened there?
So there's a man got a knock on his door and opened it to a police officer who wanted to discuss a tweet he had sent out that the man had sent out in 2025. To my knowledge, he wasn't arrested and there's no criminal charges. But just the fact that a policeman shows up at your door to discuss a tweet that you have sent out is profound. If we tolerate that, then we're going to have
Okay, but this happened in the UK, not in Canada.
No, in Canada. Sorry, in Canada earlier this week, the Justice Centre was notified by a man that police showed up at his door to discuss his Canadian tweet from last year. And so then we responded, we put out a tweet on our X saying that anybody that's got a police knocking on your door about your social media commentary, contact the Justice Centre immediately. And, we're in a position to provide legal representation.
Wow. That is unbelievable. That is a headline, Amy.
Yeah, I wanted to interject with a story of something that just happened this morning, which is quite similar and also as alarming as what John was just talking about. I got a phone call from Ezra Levant of Rebel News, letting me know that Rebel News has this truck. It has LED screens on 3 sides. They could run ads. So this is in Toronto. And over the last week, during the final FIFA World Cup game, CAUSEBAR it's a non-partisan, non-profit organization, Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. I happen to be one of the co-founders. There are many women in the group. So some of these women in Ontario sold an ad on this truck that ran during the final FIFA game, and it was in support of protecting women's sports. It said that we need to keep males out of female sports, and it mentioned that more than 6,000 women have lost awards to males competing in women's sports. It didn't even mention trans people or trans women. It just said, get males out of women's sports. So Ezra calls me this morning and he says the Toronto police have stopped the truck. Somebody made a complaint that this was a hate crime. And so when I spoke to him, he said, the police right now, they've said they're investigating a potential hate crime over this CAUSEBAR ad. And he'd called a lawyer. And so the latest is that apparently Toronto police are not going to be pressing charges. But I think the greater point is that this is not something that should be happening to begin with. Nobody should be intimidated by police for exercising their right to free speech. And it's very chilling that, we saw the Combating Hate Act just got royal assent over a month ago. And these incidents seem to already have started. John talked about this is what you expect in the UK. And, lo and behold, it's already happening in Canada. It's unacceptable.
Unbelievable. Thank you for drawing attention to that story, Amy. And again, we need to open our eyes to what's happening around us. So I want to back up for a sec here. Why does this issue matter? Why does freedom of speech matter? Nigel, can you help us answer that question?
Happy to. Who you are is kind of central, isn't it? Everybody has their own ideas of who they are, what they want to support. What we think is right and wrong. Sometimes sometimes these things are based in perhaps in the Bible, which I think around this table we probably would say, well, that's a good start to develop your own morality. On the other hand, it could also be that you take your inspiration from somewhere altogether different. The thing is, who would you accept as saying that they have the right to tell you that this idea is wrong and that idea is correct? It's fundamental. The dignity of the human being requires that the human being be able to make those kinds of decisions for itself with full knowledge. So when somebody comes along and tells you, Amy just mentioned the truck, somebody took exception to it. They think that's a hateful thing to say. Well, we don't. But we don't want the government making those decisions for us. We know what it is when we see it. And it isn't that. So, but there are people who, in order to win the argument and have their point of view prevail, will try to tell you that it is. We need the protection of the Constitution and more important even than the Constitution, the full agreement, the general acceptance of the idea that was commonplace 50 years ago. That's what you think. That's what you think. It's your opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so freedom of speech does matter. It comes out of a long, grand tradition. I think of, the Magna Carta as an example that asserted that as well. But freedom of speech is important. I would argue that it's not only an important part of, debating and getting to the truth. It's how do you have the scientific method, Amy? I mean, you are a former nurse. You are trained in the areas of science. I mean, how did that weigh into, how do you respond to the question? Why does freedom of speech matter?
I think of, I love this quote by John Stuart Mill from On Liberty. And he said, all silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. And when I was essentially put on trial in this disciplinary hearing for 22 days over reality-based, science-based comments that I made about biological sex being immutable and that persons are male or they're female. And as John knows, because his Justice Center represents me, at one point I was also initially charged with spreading medical misinformation. And then I think the college ended up dropping that charge because they figured they wouldn't be able to back up the science if they tried to accuse me of that. So instead it just fell on the hurty words that I had said to hurt people's feelings, apparently. But at one point, the College of Nurses, that's the regulator that came after me, their lawyer, while cross-examining me, said, there is no debate. And it's the same thing. It's like this is how these people function, is they need to control our speech to be able to control what other people are able to actually think and say and believe. And it's so critical that we are able to speak. And I would just say, when I started all of this, I have since become a free speech absolutist, but this wasn't my focus in the beginning. I was focused on women's sex-based rights. And I quickly realized that without free speech, you can't defend any other right at all. It's sort of the first and primary right that you need to have in order to make gains in any other area.
Okay, so freedom of speech is a foundational right, because if you can't defend or discuss these issues, then how do you even talk about those other rights? I mean, they're kind of laid to waste. So, Amy, I guess I want to clarify. Can you repeat the great John Stuart Mill's quote?
Yes. All silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. Okay.
So on that quote, I often reference a tongue-in-cheek that it's almost like the people legislating these laws, and then we'll go through them in a moment, Nigel, because I know you've done some great summaries of them, is they are the good and the great. They have a kind of the sense that they believe that they're entitled to kind of guide and control what you should be thinking and you should be speaking about, John. So why are they doing this? What is your take on the good and the great, and why they believe at this juncture they have the prerogative to introduce a whole series of laws that are really putting in jeopardy rights that we take for granted?
Well,
I think.
Sorry, go ahead. I think the thing.
Oh, is it?
Sorry, I think John was going to go first there, and then I'll go back to you, Nigel.
So I think arrogance and supreme overconfidence are a big part of the picture. It's free speech for me, but not for thee. The very same people that are censoring speech and that would, we've got members of parliament that would criminalize residential school denialism, which presumably would make it illegal to question the probably false and certainly unproven claim that there are bodies of 215 Aboriginal children buried at the former Kamloops Indian residential school. I don't know if that legislation would catch that or not, but just the notion that government is going to decide what is the historical truth, and you're going to be criminally prosecuted if you depart from what government deems to be true. So it's a monumental arrogance that drives it, where people can't conceive of the possibility that they themselves could be wrong. So that's a psychological component. You asked earlier, why do we have free speech anyway? What's the purpose? And I'll rattle off a few, and this is not an exhaustive list, but free speech is necessary for democratic decision-making. It's necessary for the development of good laws. If every law that's proposed by government cannot be vigorously criticized, and criticisms responded to and back and forth, you're less likely to end up with good laws when you don't have vigorous criticism. It's part of our human dignity and self-fulfillment. We don't see spiders or wolves clamoring for free speech because they seem to, well, I don't know about wolves howling at the moon, but generally they seem to thrive without it. Whereas we as humans, it's part of being human. And a very important one is that we need free speech in order to think and in order to formulate more intelligent thought. And if I can't speak freely, it actually impedes, it hampers my thinking process. You may have noticed sometimes if you're talking to a friend who is a really good listener and you're struggling with some problem, and you just talk on and on and on for 10, 20, 30 minutes, and your friend patiently listens, at the end of 30 minutes, you've got a far clearer. Now you've identified the problem, you've identified possible solutions. Why? Because you've been speaking. So we need to speak in order to think intelligently. And if we're gagged, the quality of our thinking is going to be vastly inferior.
Right on, John. I like the way you're thinking. I was always taught the quality of your life is dependent on your level of your thinking. So by golly, we can learn from each other, can't we? So if you have these overlords, saying you shall think about this and not think about that, then surely we are hobbling our society and our ability to think. So what's your comment, Nigel? Why do the good and the great think that they're so great and good that they can just tell us what to think?
I think that can be that's pretty universal. Once you get into power, you think you've got supreme power, and it takes having an ideology of the kind that we're discussing, based on the people that we're talking about. John Stuart Mill, for example. I would add Edmund Burke to that. But there's quite a constellation of people who came up with important ideas in the last 250 years, and they very much changed the way that politics was done. Well, the people who didn't like the new look are now in positions of power and starting to push back. You asked me what I thought of them. Well, obviously I don't agree with them, and therefore I tend to be rather disparaging over the teacup when we're talking about them. However, it's what Canadians have chosen, which tells me something about the general level of understanding of politics within Canada. What went wrong, because we all grew up receiving these thoughts as gospel. And it takes you further back into the way opinion is formed, starting from grade school and carrying on through university. So there's been I had started off by saying, well, this is something over the last 10 years. John jumped in and said, well, actually, it's been going on for a lot longer than that. And it has. He's right about that. It's just that this government in the last 10 years has had a very directed effort to take on to themselves the right to find what is good and right thinking. And I think you're taking us in that direction with the discussion.
Indeed. So, Amy, do you think Nigel's onto something, that this is kind of a situation where it begs serious questions around where Canadians are at? I think John referenced earlier the importance of culture and framing this up. Is this a situation where we almost trust our government too much? We kind of believe that they kind of know what's best for us, like children.
Yeah. And what's interesting about a lot of the legislation that we'll get into and talk about. So, one of them right now, the Safe Social Media Act, and the other bills as well. There's so much of this sort of safety, like the government needs to come in and protect us from dangerous words and dangerous ideas. And the Safe Social Media Act, which is
Mhm.
about protecting children on the internet, which I argue is that that's a parental responsibility. The government doesn't need to be doing that, but it's like when people believe that this danger exists and that the government should take care of it, they're not paying attention to the freedoms that they're giving away in the meantime. If,
Mhm.
say, this social media act passes and then essentially everyone is going to have to use ID to get onto the internet, it's a massive violation of privacy. And the same can be said. So I think that sometimes Canadians are, voting for parties or supporting politicians that pass this bad legislation, and they don't necessarily understand that it's eroding our rights in the way that it is. And I think
Mhm.
that's why it's so important that you've got people like John Carpay doing so much public education about what these bills are actually doing and what to our rights and freedoms.
Right on. So I think you've hit a very important point, Amy. Is there's a kind of a double speak going on here? How can you be against words like safety or national security and all the rest? Like, so this is almost very confusing. You have to really look at this critically. So speaking of which, Nigel, you have done an amazing set of summaries around the bills, and I know that John Carpay has, and Amy, you've written about them as well. Can we go through this as a bit of as a team here, just to highlight some of the basic issues here? Can we begin, Nigel, with your help? What's the problem with Bill C-11 and what is it?
Well, so Bill C-11 is just happen to have the, the thing here. Um, Bill C-11 came in about 4 years ago, and it's called the Online Streaming Act. Well, to Amy's point, that like there's so many of these things are offered as a benefit, and then they slide something that you don't like so much in at the same time.
Mhm.
Well, C-11, the object was clear enough. They wanted to uh, they wanted to collect money from American streaming companies, which Canadians were buying the service, but there was nothing coming to the government to support the production of Canadian content. And I
Mhm.
think there was also probably a feeling that the Americans shouldn't be allowed such free access to our minds. That would be in sync with everything else they've done. Okay, so they bring it. They say, all right, you've got to start paying. That's what the bill is about. By the way, um, we're also going to make sure that the things that we want people to see are put at the top of the search. It's called discoverability. So if you go in and search for something, what you see first is likely to be enough of an answer for you. The government has now taken onto itself the chore of giving the CRTC the
Mhm.
right to make some things easier to find than others. And of course, the ones they don't want you to find, they'll make push way down the list. You'll have to work really hard to find them. You know,
Okay, so I just want to pause there for a sec. So this is a very important point, is that when you talk about discoverability, if you do a search engine and the government is guiding you in terms of the information that comes up, they have enormous power because most people don't go back to the search and look down at item number 21 that comes up that arguably may be the real information. So it's a complicated thing, but the government is the last party you want weighing in on that discoverability. So that's a very important point that you're making, Nigel.
well, and you'll find the same thing in different ways with all six of these bills that we're talking about. They offer something that sounds really
Yeah.
positive, and they grab a little bit of power for themselves in one of the subsidiary paragraphs.
Right on. There's also Bill C-18. What is that about, John?
C-18 is the Online News Act, and it resulted in Canadians no longer being able to forward news links via Facebook and Instagram. It also resulted in Google agreeing to pay $100 million a year into a media slush fund, which is going, of course, only to government-approved media. So, it won't be seen by the Western Standard or the Frontier Center or the Epoch Times or the Rebel or Juno News. So yeah, this actually caused great damage to independent media in Canada. I know a broadcaster in Kelowna, I think his program's called Kelowna Now, Jim Check. And when C-18 passed and it became impossible for Canadians to forward news links to each other via Facebook and Instagram, his viewership declined massively, because prior to C-18, millions and millions of Canadians were sharing news stories with each other via Facebook. In fact, for a lot of people, the only news they get is what they get sent to them by their friends, relatives, colleagues, family members. The people who independently say, okay, well, I haven't looked at the news in the past 24 hours. I'm going to see what's going on in the world. They're probably a minority. Most of us get news sent to us or shared on X, for example. So this is a way to keep Canadians in the dark, because the net result has been that Canadians are viewing less news thanks to Bill C-18.
Wow. So what's your comment, Amy, on that? Is John onto something, that they're creating kind of an information bubble around Canadians? And I know that you write for the National Post. I think the National Post has been one of these incisive voices around these issues. But what do you see from your perspective?
I completely agree. I think that this act has essentially strangled the market for independent media, and it's enabled the government to sort of decide which news sources they have deemed official and worthy of being seen by Canadians. And it's, this is there's so much, our populace is so polarized, and I notice that there's such a difference in mentality depending on sort of if people are just getting their mainstream media diet from the CBC or CTV versus people who actually go onto X, which X right now I think is just such an incredible platform for free speech and for sharing of independent news, and just breaking sort of citizen journalism type news. And the people who are not getting that information, we've been seeing since when this was passed in 2023 as well. And we're already noticing that it's having an impact on the way that people think and how they feel about fellow Canadians and the government. And it's going to be really hard to undo the damage that this has done. And again, it's presented to us as this great thing that the government is trying to make sure that media gets paid properly for the work they're doing. I know it's so unfair they're not getting paid, but they've strangled independent media, and they've made it even more difficult for independent media to get paid and to share their work. So it had the opposite intended effect, and it's also a censorship tool.
Can I just make a quick observation there, David?
Yes, indeed.
When Amy talked about people were not getting the news, what the newspaper industry did not realize was that Facebook had become its paperboy. When this law came into effect, people found they couldn't get Canadian news on Facebook. Their response was not to go and renew their online newspaper restriction. They just went somewhere else or nowhere. It just stopped, and that's why what was going on there, in effect, was that the newspapers were asking their paperboy to pay for the privilege of distributing their news. And not surprisingly, Meta said, well, we're not going to do that. And Google said, well, we will if the price is right, but we're not going to pay much.
Interesting. So it strikes me that, we haven't even touched on all the other bills. Like there's Bill C-9 that really begs the question what you can say as a leader within a faith community about what you sincerely hold to be true. They've taken away that good faith provision that you can preach a sermon about whatever. And this goes for every religion. This, Bill C-34 introduces a online digital commissioner regarding so-called, digital safety. This is like out of a bad movie when it comes to all the instruments that they're putting in place. It strikes me like a chessboard where they're putting in place all these pieces to systematically control things top to bottom. And I guess the question is, are we just being too cynical in the sense that all these things are for our national security, our safety, the kids they talk about? Like, are we just simply being too cynical? John, I mean, I noticed you were,
Yeah, we're not being too cynical. Absolutely not. Those who study history, even just a little bit, you don't need to be a professional historian, but those who study history will know that safety and security are the banner used by politicians to take away our rights and freedoms. And we saw it in communist Russia in 1917. We got to keep you safe from capitalism and these evil capitalists who are exploiting you. Yes. Therefore, we need to burn down your churches, and we need to send far more people to Siberia than what the Tsar ever did. And then 10 years later, the National Socialists in Germany are looking at the horrors of communism,
wait a sec, John.
And
you
they're
mean
saying
burning down churches in the Soviet Union or burning down churches in Canada?
Well, thank you for asking the question. I mean, no, I'm talking about when the communists took power, they had a ruthless crackdown on religious freedom, parental rights, and they set up a state of terror that most historians believe it was far worse than the repressive regime that they had under the czars. I mean, there are far more people sent to Siberia under the communists. But I'm talking about their tactics. So their tactic was to say, we got to keep you safe from capitalism. Then the National Socialists in Germany, barely 10 years later, said, we got to keep you safe from the communists and the Jews. So we got to take away your rights and freedoms.
Right.
And in the past century, we've had our rights and freedoms trampled on because we got to keep you safe from a virus. We got to keep you safe from the terrorists. We got to keep you safe from the evil neighbor next door. There's always something we got to keep you safe from. We got to keep you safe from the hackers that are going to hack into so we need a cybersecurity act. Yeah. We need to keep the kids safe from online harms. It's always safety, 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 safety. And on people who don't know history, it's a slogan that works very effectively.
Wow. So it's interesting. I just saw a comment, and there's wonderful comments from the audience here. One goes back to benevolent dictator number one, ironically. If you want to change the laws of a country, you just simply change the language. That is why they are going after speech and criminalizing words and thoughts contrary to the government narrative. Well said. This sounds like 1984, Amy. What do you think?
Yeah, I know there's a great meme that people share quite often on X in response to sort of the latest news of the day that reads more like parody, and it'll say the make 1984 fiction again. And I think that's so right. And I can't tell you how many times I wanted to bang my head against the wall when you hear some of the language that people try to create and enforce. And, then they'll do actually harmful things to people. Like, let's say we're talking about gender ideology and actual harms are befalling women and children, whether it's the invasion of our formerly sex segregated spaces or children who are being harmed by a medical scandal. But then you're told that, not using the proper pronouns or whatever language they're using, that's the actual harm, that words have the potential to literally erase the existence of a class of people. And it's infuriating to have things flipped on their head this way, trying to control what you think and believe, and then being told that your words are harmful when that's not the case at all.
I agree. Well said, Amy. So I want to turn to solutions in a moment, but I do want to share with you an interesting clip, because sometimes I get comments from different quarters to say, well, what does this topic have to do with Canadians? I mean, the government wants to control, speech. They want to deal with hate speech and all the rest, the safety of the kids. But what does this have to do with prosperity? And I want to share an interesting clip from a conversation I had with Catherine Swift about making Canada more investable again. And it has to relate to this word named culture. And I want to share that with you now.
Any healthy democracy has a healthy small business sector, has freedom. Look at these repressive countries. When you look at how many patents they produce, for example, Zero.
And therein lies that kind of energetic, vibrant culture that statistically produces more of those unique people called entrepreneurs, those people that are going to fidget with things in their garage and develop the next basis for a breakthrough in technology or anything, really. Those are really important people that we really want to nurture here. So, Nigel, can you have a prosperous country if you don't have free speech?
Well, I think Catherine Swift made the point perfectly, frankly, that it's often been remarked that the only novelty that has come out of the Islamic world in the last 100 years is the self-exploding vest. Certain cultures allow you to follow your own thoughts to their conclusion, and others don't. And it's not that, as the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany show, that you can't have a kind of a top-down technology sector, but in the end, it was the other guys who won. Mm-hmm. But I just want to make one observation that about Bill C-34, which I think is fundamental to what we're talking about here, and it is we're talking about the Digital Safety Commissioner.
Yes.
Who is appointed and who then has the unlimited powers of an appointee, unrestrained by any statutory limits at all. And he is the one who is going to decide what is hate speech. So to pick up on an earlier example, if the Digital Safety Commissioner, who will certainly be somebody who ticks all the right boxes from a liberal point of view, says that it is hateful, for example, to say that the Indian residential school narrative is a hoax or has not been proven, then that becomes the standard. And it is set by an individual, not by discussion, not even by discussion among parliamentarians, but it's an appointed bureaucrat who says this is the truth. And if you deviate from it, you will find that there is no recourse, because we also control the hearing process by which you would make your complaint. So you will find, if this goes through as the law is written, and I think John ought to be commenting on this as well, if the law goes through as it is written, there will be this supremely powerful person who can determine what truth is and what penalties apply if you are judged to have breached it. That's Bill C-34. That's why I am worried about it.
Unbelievable. John, your comment?
But Nigel, aren't you concerned about the children?
Yes.
That's a pretext. You know what? Unfortunately, Canadian parents have contributed to this scenario that we are in right now, because if parents, and I know some parents do a fantastic job, and they limit the time, they limit the access, they install software on their kid's phone, making it impossible or at least difficult to access pornography. There are parents who monitor the texts that their kids are sending and receiving. And, how could I condone that, being against the surveillance state? And I say, well, parental rights are very different than the rights that governments should have over us as adults. But a lot of parents have just let this slide. They let the kids use the internet, 16 hours a day. They let kids take their computers into their own bedrooms. Yep. And so now, we're in this scenario where there is a legitimate pretext. I think that the social media are harming children and adults. There's a dark side to it. There's also an educational side. You can learn great things. The Justice Center has accounts on X and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and whatever. So, but it's the state stepping into a vacuum that really has been left by parents, and that's tragic. And I echo Nigel's remarks. This all-powerful, or very powerful, not all-powerful, Digital Safety Commission is going to be this unelected, unaccounted body that gets to regulate the internet. And the Bill C-34, the Safe Social Media Act, also gives huge powers to the federal cabinet, which will make rules without any input from or oversight by Parliament. And so you've got the federal cabinet and the Digital Safety Act, according to University of Ottawa law professor Michael Geist, there are 50 issues that they get to decide after the bill is passed. So the MPs are voting. If the members of Parliament pass this bill, they're actually passing substantial. They're passing 50 blank checks on all kinds of 50 different issues. What the Digital Safety Commission and the federal cabinet can do without accountability once the bill is in force. This is not a lengthy bill it is a lengthy bill, but this is not a bill that actually covers all the issues and topics specifically of what powers the Digital Safety Commission and the federal cabinet are going to exercise.
Right on. Well said, John. I want to turn to you, Amy, for your comment in just a moment, but I want to just highlight some of the big impacts here because it is overwhelming. And just to clarify, we're talking about a myriad of bills. There's like 6 of them in particular: C11, C18, 22, 8, 9, and 34. But when you look at this, there's a lot of great resources. I encourage you to look at the Frontier website, also the Justice Center. Nigel Hannaford, you did a terrific piece looking at a roadmap for success here. I think we've got a kind of a slide that highlights that paper. But when we look at this, Amy, what is the concern that you have the most when you look at this myriad of legislation? It's kind of overwhelming, but is there a key one that you want to really underline and highlight?
Well, the Safe Social Media Act I think it just went through first reading. It hasn't passed yet. There's maybe still time to prevent this, but something I would also note is there's a lot of emotional manipulation going on. We already talked about it's framed as safety, but another thing that happens is you get these parents, including the mother of the late Rehtaeh Parsons, who tragically committed suicide after online bullying. And there are a few other similar parents in Canada who've tragically lost their children because of things that happened online. And they will go and they will advocate and push for this law. And their stories are so powerful and so touching and also so terrifying to parents of children either at or approaching these ages. And it's hard to hear their stories and want to disagree with them. So, I would implore everyone to try to keep talking to people about what is the sort of, that's a pretense for what this law could actually do. And just reinforcing the idea that parents have a responsibility for the safety of their children and not the government. And here's what can happen if we give away those powers. And, none of that is to say that social media isn't incredibly harmful. There's a lot of brilliant people talking about it. Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of work about this and shown that youth mental health is just tanking in the era of social media. So it's such an important issue, but again, if you go to sort of the base principles, our rights and our freedoms we always have to maintain those. We cannot give an inch or budge on our rights and freedoms. So just don't support these bills and keep talking to other Canadians who might not be able to understand sort of the context of what's happening here, especially in light of the emotional manipulation we're seeing.
Right on. Well said. Yeah, and our hearts do go out to parents. In the case of the tragedies with a variety of children, it's horrible. At the same time, I recall well a famous quote. A tech oligarch was asked the question, would you ever allow your children to have a smartphone? And his response was, never would I allow my children to have a smartphone because this would jeopardize their ability to think. And that was none other than Steve Jobs. So I think you've got to understand the internet is truly like the world at your doorstep, your fingertips, and your eyes. And so surely you have to understand the gravity of that access and control it accordingly. But there's a lot at stake here. Clearly, many governments around the world, and there's many case studies, want to control the internet. They want to ensure that you don't have any privacy in terms of your emails. They want to, in this legislation, you can see the ability to suspend your access to email or the internet arbitrarily. The Digital Safety Commissioner has been highlighted here in terms of that power. Their ability to define hate in a way that is truly ambiguous when we already do have hate laws, and an ability to undertake that wisely. So it goes on, let alone the assaults within communities of faith under Bill C9. So we have a lot of issues here. So I want to move to solutions here, because this has been a far-reaching conversation as we're getting kind of towards the end of it. But if we bring up that slide, Madam Producer, we can see a list of solutions here as we look to wrapping up the program. The question is, do we amend or drop the bad legislation? We've talked about building awareness, but I think there's something deeper going on here. How is this possible? Do we need to renew our institutions and indeed our culture? And then the question of citizen involvement, and that's been alluded to. So, Nigel, I want to turn to you for a moment here, because I think we've got another slide when it comes to your document and recommendations around a roadmap, and that was done with the Justice Center. And feel free to chime in here, John and Amy. But if we could bring up that slide, Madam Producer, around things that need to be done when it comes to this legislation, I think there's a summary of that if we have that available. But Nigel, do you want to take respond to that?
Yes. The first thing that we have to do is to make sure that every member of Parliament understands what it is we're talking about. Not every MP is interested in every subject, but they all get to vote on everything. So, it's great to talk about cultural renewal, and it is necessary, and we need to be active in that as well. But let's face it, the other side has been doing cultural renewal for the last 50 or 60 years in Canada, and that is where we've got us. And if it takes us 50 or 60 years to get back to where we started, if that were even possible, it's a little too late for some of us, if you know what I mean. So, while we still can use Parliament, then we must use Parliament.
Okay, so this is very important advice. Let's use Parliament. I think the list that you've included here is amend the changes enacted under Bill C8, amend the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act. So there's even other bills here. You've got a whole list here. But
these are all the things that Parliament can do that we as private citizens can't. We don't want to go around breaking windows and setting things on fire. That's not how we pursue social change. You've got to get your MPs to care about this stuff.
Right on. So a key point of advice here is to get in touch with your MP. Would you agree with that, John, and then Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. The Justice Center released a report, Privacy Roadmap. This was just on Wednesday, July 22nd. Oh, you've got a far better image there. And this is something people can read. It's deliberately written in layman's language. It's not for lawyers. It's not written for lawyers. It's written for the general public. It's not written for technology experts. It's written for the general public. So that's a good way, one way for citizens to inform themselves. And it's important to be engaged. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And what we've had a lot of the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years is good people who love truth, who love justice, who love freedom, have been doing nothing in terms of their political participation. They vote once every 4 years and then they tune out again. So there's a lot of good people who have done nothing.
Wait a sec here, John. Are you saying that Canadians like me, like I'm the problem? Because like I do my voting every 4 years. Surely that's enough. Is that what you're saying? Is your challenge? You say, no, it isn't enough.
It may have been enough 50 or 60 years ago to just vote and then tune out. Although even then it would have been very unwise. But we're at a point, it is possible to turn things around, because I see this awakening happening, especially since the lockdown tyranny, when we were stripped of our charter rights and freedoms without a valid scientific justification. And a lot of people have woken up and it's like, okay, wait a minute, I do have to pay attention to politics, using the word broadly, laws, policies, elections, politicians. I got to pay attention and I got to be involved. So I think we have more Canadians today who love truth, justice, and freedom, who are active in the democratic process than what was the case 6 years ago. So that's positive, but we need to do a whole lot more.
Okay. No, and I sincerely resonate with you, John. We got to do more. You got to speak up. That's just simply not enough to vote every 4 years. Right on. What's your comment, Amy? What do you think?
I completely agree. And the idea of talk to your MP, I will just add as a little caveat is if your MP will speak to you. For years I had an NDP member of parliament, Peter Julian, who refused to speak to me about issues and actually blocked me on social media. So there are some pretty nasty, censorious politicians out there in
Yeah.
Canada too. And
Sorry to hear that.
yeah,
That's crazy. Well, but
is
it's
crazy.
interesting, Amy, in your case though, like you have been a courageous leader on so many fronts, and so have John and Nigel. And it's not been easy, and it's come at a huge price. But one of your fans has been none other than an incredible author, J.K. Rowling, who has kind of taken you under their wing. How has that been helpful? Like, because I mean, because of your courageous position to speak up, there's others that have noticed that. And has that been an encouragement? Is that kind of like a lesson learned that we got to support each other as a team? You don't just do this alone. You work together with others.
It definitely takes an army, and it's lovely and helpful to get support from big names, but that doesn't. I would like to underscore the importance of everybody speaking out because we need more
Yes.
people to do that. People
Mhm.
don't really understand, like, hey, that's not my pet issue. I don't plan to talk about the
Mhm.
215 graves. I don't plan to talk about women's sex-based rights or whatever. But that doesn't matter because at some point, if things continue this way, whatever your issue is will become the next thing. So we need to support one another and protect one another's rights and freedoms and stand up for each other. And more people need to do it. And, not just the J.K. Rowlings, we need everyday Canadians, professionals to stand up for free speech and to try to set things right in this country. And I think we're not going to make progress unless more of us finally stand up.
Right on. Let us speak up. So, Nigel, you started off with a very interesting comment about an hour ago, and you referenced culture, and so did John. All of you have. And I'm wondering, is all of this a symptom of a deeper issue? Is that ultimately our rights and freedoms reside in really our hearts and our minds as we go about our day-to-day behaviors? And if we don't carry those in our culture, how we treat each other every day, then they will pass into the night. And this is the lesson that we must learn and appreciate. I mean, Nigel, you speak so eloquently about this grand Anglo-Saxon tradition. Is that not the issue? Is these people are trying to change our culture so that we don't think about these rights and freedoms anymore, and we are just like sheep.
You've got to understand that what you're calling our culture and what I am calling, Amy and John are calling our culture, is in danger of being an island in history and geography. Most of the world never had a free speech culture. Most of the world is watching what we do and thinking, well, what's the problem here? What the Liberal government is attempting to achieve is very normal in the rest of the world and has been throughout history.
Interesting.
Can I have 10 more seconds on this? Because you're asking about the soul here and why it is that the common consensus used to be that we give each other space, and now we hate each other and we're always at each other's throats. Amy made that point earlier. It's got to do with the place we accord to God in our culture. That's going to offend a lot of people, but we have moved away from God and God is moving away from us.
Okay, so this begs serious questions around how culture impacts public policy. And so I think you're underlining the premise that the assumption has been in our long Anglo-Saxon tradition, which is unique in the world, there's no doubt about it, has believed that our rights come not from the state, not from the prime minister, the king, if you will, but from the divine. And even if you are not a believer, that has been a key philosophical basis, hasn't it, John?
Well, there's a concept, it's recognized by the US Constitution and has been recognized by American courts, the natural law. So,
Natural law, yes.
Which is and you don't have to be a theist or a religious person, but it's the understanding that there is a higher principle that we are to adhere to, and laws must conform with that higher principle. This is something we see in history. Germany, under the National Socialists in the 1930s, there was no recognition of natural law at all, and the judges simply followed the letter of the law and said, well, the law is the law, so you got to obey the law, we got to apply the law, and that was it, right? And that's not how, a healthy and admirable civilization, if it doesn't believe, people believe in God or they believe in natural law. There is a higher moral order that not only our behaviors should conform to, but the laws itself, the laws of the land, need to conform to natural law. And we saw under lockdowns, there were people who disobeyed the chief medical officer's health orders, which were laws. But there's a higher law here that the government has no business telling us we can't have Christmas dinner with our parents or with our children, and numerous other examples. So there were people who acted according to natural law and did not follow the edicts of the chief medical officer.
Well said. So I want to wrap up our discussion today and thank our panelists. And Amy, I want to ask you, what does courage have to do with this discussion? You've lived and breathed this intimately as you've stood up for freedom of speech. Where does courage and those types of character issues fit into this?
Yeah, it's a strange thing to answer. I just know in my case, and I appreciate being called courageous. And I guess just for me, it was saying the truth. And then when people try to shut you down for telling the truth, and you don't really know how you're going to react in the moment until you do, or whether you're, going to carry on or not. But I think that I wouldn't want to sort of discourage people or make people think you have to be this very courageous, very brave person just to tell the truth. I think that it's not really, it's not such a big deal to just stand up and speak the truth, especially if people do it en masse.
Indeed. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right. Exactly. So well said. Amy Hamm, columnist with the National Post and leader within all kinds of areas, including freedom of speech, and Nigel Hannaford, columnist at the Western Standard. Be sure to check out Nigel's take on this important set of issues. And of course, the great John Carpay, the leader of the Justice Center. Thank you very much for joining us today for this very important discussion.
Thank you. Best wishes for the rest of the day.
All right, so that brings to a conclusion our discussion today. And I, of course, want to thank our panelists and our guests, as well as, of course, our audience and MCA Media and our producer, Lorraine. We've had Andrea fill in today, so thank you, Andrea. And of course, I want to wish everyone a terrific week, and be sure to check us out in terms of our websites at the Frontier Center for Public Policy and our channels, and of course, on Merit TV right across the country. So be sure to join us next week as we look to a fascinating topic on what is Canada's trade strategy and what is our policy that we're pursuing here, as we all try to figure out how we bring our country together so we can prove and move forward on prosperity. So until then, I wish you a great week and all the very best.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.